Hello and welcome to Everybody Dice podcast number 56, where we're going to be talking a bit about what we think is the most impressive board game expansion. I'm Steve, and today I am joined by
Daryl!
and
Ian,
lovely stuff.
that
That's
now that we know where you're pointing,
It
worked.
worked.
yeah.
So
Uh,
well.
I still
So
pointed the
well.
wrong way because I want to point that way, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, semantics. Anyway, how are you guys anyway?
You're not bad.
I'm okay.
Good.
You?
I'm fine.
Good, good.
Ever ask how Steve is?
No, I
Do you
don't
just-
think we do. I think we just
just-
go past it.
No, I'm just do the podcast and that's it. That's all
Yeah.
that's all I do with my life anymore. Anyway, speaking of the Everybody Dice channel, we debuted a new series the other day. Board Game Island, which is a little video where we'll have a different guest on each episode of it, and they'll talk us through 3 board games that they would take away with them to a desert island. But we also tie in a few other things as well and talk about maybe some non-board game related things as well. It came off pretty good, and I'm quite happy with it. So please do go and check that out. And we also want to hear your suggestions as well. If you have any board game YouTubers or board game designers or anything like that that you think might like to come on and have a chat with us, then please do give us those names in the comments down below, and we'll get in touch and we'll see what we can do. Apart from that, we might as well get straight on to what we've been playing. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is Unmatched. Specifically,
Oh.
the Little Red Riding Hood and Beowulf set that just came out, because me and Daryl have both bought this, and we've both had a chance to have a look at it. I don't know whether... Did you get the Buffy set at all, Daryl?
So I have pre-ordered it. I pre-ordered it with I can't remember the name of the company now, but I pre-ordered it with a company. But for some reason, they seem to be getting stuff slightly later than the smaller places. I noticed. So I know you said the other day it was in stock. But like I said, I haven't had an email yet to say it's coming. I imagine it'll be this week,
Okay.
probably.
Yeah, okay, so we'll just stick to Little Red Riding Hood and Beowulf for the time being.
Yes.
I honestly think this is one of the most interesting sets. I don't know what you think of it, Daryl.
So I legit haven't. I mean, I've opened it, but unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to play it because other stuff, like I said, other stuff's
Oh.
arrived within. So I have got as far as punching out stuff,
Have
but
you-
still haven't taken the cards out of the cellophane.
So you haven't had a
It's-
chance to look at the how the characters actually play then?
No, I know that Red Riding Hood has like a basket mechanic, and I think Beowulf has like a rage mechanic, which I'm curious to see how that works.
So
Cool.
so Beowulf, in my opinion, is quite a good starter character actually.
Okay.
Just because a lot of his cards will give rage effects and things like that. I mean, I would want to just stress first of all, we usually try and explain the games and stuff like that. I think we've talked about Unmatched before, but
Yeah, we've been through a few.
if you really want an idea of what Unmatched is, it's kind of a grid-based board game where you're moving basically one miniature across the board. They may have some sidekicks as well, which are usually represented by tokens, and they basically have a duel on a board
Yeah.
through card play. So, in other words, every single turn, you'll move your character however many spaces they can move. You can play a card to trigger their ability, and it's just a duel until one player's main character, not their sidekicks, run out of health. So you've kind of got the options of either trying to take out the sidekicks, which can sometimes be a bit bothersome, or you can just
Yeah.
go straight for the main person, try and finish it as quickly as possible. But yeah, like I was saying, the Beowulf one is actually quite a cool little starter character, just because it's got a really basic system of some cards will build up your rage, and then other cards will let you spend that rage. So essentially, what you're doing is you're gaining a currency, which is then allowing
Okay.
you to. You're then allowed to spend in order to do additional things. So, like I say, it's very simple and very straightforward. Whereas then the Little Red Riding Hood character is a lot more complex. The basket, basically, there are a number of symbols that are on your cards, and whatever is currently the card on top of your basket is your current suit almost.
Oh wow. Okay.
So if you play cards from your hand, which say, should the top of your basket show this, you get to do this as well. And there are some really, really powerful abilities that Little Red Riding Hood actually gets. But it takes a hell of a lot of hand organization in order to get it right. This is why I think it's one of the most interesting sets, because you've almost got a character that's really good for beginners, but then you've got one that someone needs to think about a bit more.
Okay, like slightly more intimate.
Yeah, so you definitely get a more intermediate character in there. So there's
Hmm.
there's a very clear difficulty level between the two characters. Um, the other thing that's interesting, and they've done this with one other set, I think they've actually given like attributes to the board. I think there was something on the Jurassic Park board that was a bit different.
Yeah, you had one-way systems. So
Yes.
it was basically when you get in the paddock. The only thing I would say about the Jurassic Park one, it was only one side of the board. I've just seen this one, obviously, is double side, which is a nice little sort of return to that kind of thing. But yeah, basically, you had like a one-way system. So once you're in there, you could only travel in the intended direction. So it was a nice way of kind of, especially against the Raptors, it's very good because you start behind the pens. So it's a good way to lure them in. I mean, they have to initially kind of come to you because you're dealing with three full Raptors. It's quite a tricky situation for one person. So yeah, they've made it a little bit more evened out, I guess you could say. But yeah,
But yeah, this one has a door mechanic to it. So there are
I saw
certain
that.
spaces, yeah, where you can just plant a door down,
That's pretty cool.
which kind of like represents you closing a door. I think you can close, if I remember right, you can close the door for free, but it costs one movement point to open a door. So
Okay.
essentially, you can just run rings around someone and just keep slamming
Trap
doors in
them.
their face just to make things really, really awkward for them.
Yeah.
It's only a very little thing, but it's kind of just an extra thing that's there if you decide you want to spice things up by playing with this board, basically. It's kind of neat that in every one of these sets you get a new board to play with, as well
Yeah.
as a few new characters. So, yeah, the way it's expanding is quite neat.
Yeah, I would say it's nice to see the smaller two-player sets are starting to come out with a lot more mechanics that can add to different sort of extra scenarios. Like you said, the doors with this one, the Jurassic Park had mines. So it's interesting they're adding like little extra elements that kind of can change up the gameplay rather than because the core set was really good. You only had a few. Each character had its own sort of ability, I suppose, but there was a couple of them that shared different sort of similarities, I guess, with the some of the stuff. So like you had Sinbad with like the cards that allow you to do voyages, and then they buff you, and then I think it was Arthur can boost his attack where no one else can. And then you had Alice, which could change size, which that was quite a nice mechanic. So if you were small, you were more defense, and if you were bigger, you were more attack. So it was kind of you could choose when to swap to sizes and then sort of anticipate what your opponent was going to do. So that was quite cool. It's nice to see they're kind of keeping up, sort of making it not boring. Like if they just kept bringing out characters and just going, "Oh, here you go," is a I don't know, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for instance, whatever.
As
You just be like,
someone
eh.
who hasn't played it and hasn't interacted with it at all, every time you guys talk about it, it sounds like there's a new niche, new. I don't want to use the word gimmick because it sounds like it's a bad thing, but like
Yeah.
every character system has a new trait that interacts differently with the field and means that and nothing is like a side grade. It's not like there's an equivalent. It feels like every character has their own purpose, and they're sort of their own culture to what they do. It's everything feels different, and it feels like everything's got its own positives and negatives, and it's not like everyone has a set number of power points and they're all the same power level. It's everything is scaled completely different, but the way they interact with each other makes it very different, which is very cool.
Yeah, I think they've definitely done a really good job of kind of making each fighter feel well, to some extent unique. So like each one is bringing a new variant to the table. So you can, I mean, the whole point of it is to mix and match, isn't it? I mean, you'd never, well, you'd never find Beowulf versus Little Red Riding Hood. But then at the same time, I'd love to fight Little Red Riding Hood against Bigfoot. So it's stuff like that. You just kind of throw them all into these weird scenarios, and each one brings their own abilities that makes them a unique playable character. They share a couple of similarities, like they will all have a couple of cards that will cancel out the effects of another card, but that's just kind of an easy thing sort of each for decks. But yeah, it's nice that they do have and especially like you say, you've not had an interaction with it yet, you can see there's subtle differences between each set or each character or each whatever. So yeah.
I mean, I will say I do tend to find that when they release these sets, the two characters, like in the two player sets and stuff like that, they tend to put two characters that are almost like a foil to one another, almost like the strengths and weaknesses of both of them kind of complement one another, should I say. So like, for example, like in the Jurassic Park set, you've got Ingen, who has a lot of traps that he can set, whereas the Raptors have an ambush ability, which these abilities don't always work quite so well with some of the characters outside of that set, but for one another, it's very much you're trying to outthink one another and stuff like that. Like, for example, if I was to say Medusa versus Ingen, for example, because all of Medusa's stuff is all ranged and stuff like that, Ingen's trap abilities are a little bit nullified against him, and you have to try and find another way to play, almost. You know, it does definitely feel like that at points in the Unmatched universe.
I imagine there is going to be some incompatibility between sets. Like there are going to be newer sets that might have more expanded rules that you might not be able to bring all the way back to say the core set. I am desperately curious.
I wonder how they're going to handle scaling. Because in a lot of things like this, you tend to find that in order to encourage the purchase of new sets, GW are probably the most guilty for this in my experience, but new sets come out with different powers, new powers, more powerful powers, and are scaled to be more powerful to encourage the customer to purchase the new set to compete, or purchase a new set because it has things in it that make it more usable than perhaps others. I wonder whether they'll keep because it's nothing's a side grade in this. It feels like everything's so different. It's probably going to be easier to keep the scale right because you just do your own thing for each thing. But I think the hope is there that they don't incorrectly scale stuff in such a way that you get sort of scaling problems that GW have, which is new codex, new army. This army is meta for a while, and it's hopefully they don't have that with this, because it feels like it's the sort of thing that could be rife, where they add a new special ability for a new character that has a new thing, and it just overwrites everything else. It's dangerous territory.
I think the real test for this is coming up real soon when they release the Marvel set, because it's going to be real tempting for them to make those Marvel characters really overpowered, and have like a super powered kind of brawl between two people. But when you take them out the set, how is it going to interact?
In a real life scenario, Captain America could kick 7 shades of crap out of Red Riding Hood. It's just is what it is. Like, it's whether they manage to use their brains to make it a fair game. That's sort of its own thing, rather than going, well, in real life, Captain America would kick the crap out of a little girl.
Yeah, I think that's it, and that's why this. I do think I'm really interested to see where they go with these Marvel sets they've got coming, because this could be the problem that you're talking about, Ian. It could be if they don't handle it right. So, yeah. Anyway, shall we move on? Next up, me and Ian anyway, have been playing Oceans. We played this just the other day, using Tabletopia. Although I do have a physical copy of it. Yeah. So, yeah, like, this was interesting because I felt like I had a really good time, but it's a game that's going to play a hell of a lot better when we can actually play it physically on a table with one another, because there's a lot of pieces in this game. There's a lot of picking up stuff and moving it around. Essentially, what you're doing, if you've ever played Evolution before, this is a really, really similar game to that. You have a pool in the center of the table that's split up into 4 different sections, 3 ocean zones and a reef. They're all populated by fish, and everyone else is playing cards in front of them to create species of underwater animals that are all going to interact with one another through various different means, and you're going to be adding more traits and evolving your species over the course of it, basically until that ocean and reef is devoid of food, at which point the game ends. Yeah.
What's interesting about this? This is the first game that we played in a long time where me being the sort of weird, picky, negative person I am, I don't have anything negative to say.
So,
Other than how irritating it was to pick up the fish on Tabletopia
that's
and place
not
them on my chart.
that's not on
Tabletopia,
Ocean.
and
Yeah.
there's not an issue with the game. I just flat out enjoyed this game. I didn't.
Yeah.
There was no part other than like maybe a slight misunderstanding with the rules right at the beginning when we were playing, but that was on us again. Like we didn't read that properly, or we didn't understand that in the way that it should have translated. After that, I just flat out enjoyed this game, and I think it's just because it's a competitive game, but I started playing it without the want to. I had a thought in my head, and I just wanted to do something, and it wasn't, oh, I want to beat Steve, or oh, I want to beat Jay, I want to beat Phil. It was, I want to make a parasitic bottom feeder, and a parasitic bottom feeder that parasites off that parasite. And I in the end, I had 5 parasitic fish that all parasited off each other. That the edge ones parasited off. One literally attacked Jay's fish, doing no damage. Bottom fed off that attack, parasited off that fish, and then it had another 2 parasites that ate the food off it, and it just moved the food all the way along my chain. And I had one on the other side that just did the same to Phil, and I just parasited off everyone else. I didn't go hunting in the reef once. I didn't do like half of the mechanics. I didn't have like the big fish that got food. I just took everyone else's, other than Steve.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that's interesting, because you had your own little ecosystem with your own series of parasites, basically.
Yeah, I just had a parasitic circle of fish that like sucked in
Man.
food from the 2 players like either side of me, and just circled the food around.
So it's worth noting that in this game, each person's turn goes through a 4 phase process almost. You start off by having to play a card, which you can either use to migrate fish across the board, because some of the ocean zones do kind of nasty things if they should ever be emptied. But also the reef is the only place where kind of the foragers and stuff like that, that's the only area that they can take things from. Likewise, fish that have passive abilities, they actually have to take them from the ocean, but not the reef. And they can only take out of one ocean zone at a time. So there's a reason why you may want to move some of the fish around. So that's one of the reasons why you play a card. But the main reason why you'd play a card is because you either want to establish a new species that you are going to try to make survive, because the more species of fish you have, the more points you're going to get towards the end of the game. But you can also play a card to enhance another species. Every species you've already got on the board can have up to 3 traits put on it, so 3 cards can go down on it. Although there are some cards that can adjust that over the course of the game. But it also, these cards not only give them abilities, but they also establish whether they're more of the attacking sort, whether they're going to attack other players fish, or whether they are going to be a forager and take fish from the reef. These are basically the things that you're going to be thinking about as you build your species, although you can also add defensive traits to them and other such things. But in that case, you may think to yourself, well, why not just establish loads and loads of species and just feed off the points of having loads and loads of different species? And the reason is because the next phase, the feeding phase, you can only choose one of your species that you have in front of you to actually feed, whether that be by attacking another player's fish or foraging out of the reef. So the more species you have, the less you can do with all of them, I suppose. You have to start adding traits to them that have more passive abilities and stuff like that, that might say something like, this fish gains two food from the ocean when the species to the right of this one attacks another fish, or something like that. There are lots of cards that say stuff like that. So the more of those you start attaching to species, the more you can feed multiple species in one turn. Like Ian was saying about his parasites, he was able to feed his entire
This is the
line.
only thing I did in the game, wasn't it? Because I had one fish that fed every turn, and that one fish fed my entire colony of fish. So it would, at the start of the turn, it would take 2 food from Jay's nearest fish. I would then attack Jay's nearest fish, which it wouldn't get anything from because Jay's fish was too strong. But because the fish on its right got attacked, it got 2 food. And then because that fish attacked, the fish next to it got 1 food. And then because that was a parasite, it took 2 food from that one. And it was just one fish that parasited off Jay that fed my entire group of fish. And once he got to the point where he was powerful enough to stop that, I made all my fish invisible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then all I had, so they all had the card that's translucent. So they were all translucent parasites. And some of them had bottom feeder and some of them had symbiotic. But those were the only cards I used, really. And then all I did was played cards every now and then to restock the reef. And sometimes intentionally overfed one of my fish, so it would dump fish back into the reef. And because the translucent card, they're only invisible whilst the reef has fish in.
I will say just at this point, the overfeeding is if you gain too many fish on your species, it hits a point where you pretty much have to dump half of your food supply back into the reef. I thought I'd just mention that real quick because I didn't mention it earlier. Yeah.
But it allowed me to, at points, just randomly dump food into the location that made all my fish impossible to attack. And like there were points where Jay could have, like, if I hadn't had those cards, he could have gone, right, I'm sick of you just taking food off me every turn, and just wiped out all my fish one by one. He had some. You all had at one point fish that were just really good, other than Phil, who I feel like got a bit unlucky.
He very much
with some of his
focused on
draws
one
and stuff.
species, I think. Like,
He got
I don't
one
know whether
big
he had a
fish that,
choice,
like,
but
He had like it ate like 10 fish worth of food every turn if he wanted it to.
Yeah.
So it could just keep itself alive. If he had parasites that could feed off that, he would have been like there was a point where I saw what he was doing and I was like, I'm going to build one of those fish and have all my fish feed off it. And I was like, well, I could do that, but then I'd be emptying the reef and all my fish would turn visible and someone could pick them off. So I just decided to eat off Jay and Phil.
So, like, one of the reasons why I said that feeding your fish is quite important is because at the end of your turn, like the third phase in your turn, is you have to age your fish, at which point you take one food token off every single one of your species and you put it into your secret scoring area. So, in other words, if at any point you have to take fish off of your species and there's nothing on there, it dies. All of the cards go into a discard pile and you just lose that species. So in other words, the more species you have, the more points you're actually getting over the course of the game. And then the last phase is just simply drawing back up your cards. Now, there is a moment in the game that we didn't really get to experience very much, which is when the first ocean space empties, the Cambrian explosion happens. What this does is it ramps up the game. All of a sudden, you can play 2 cards instead of one card every single turn, or you have to play 2 cards rather than 1 card. Your fish also age twice every aging process rather than once. So you have to be far more mindful of your species and make sure they have more than 1 food token on them, basically, because in the first part of the game you can kind of get by just having a single food token on each of your species, but once the Cambrian explosion happens, you've got to be a bit more clever about it. But it also introduces the deep cards, which is this deck with really weird, unusual abilities. The cards you're playing with at the beginning of the game, there's loads and loads of copies of basically a handful of basic abilities. But the deep is a massive deck of unique abilities that only make an occurrence once per run through of the deck. We didn't really get to see it very much because we didn't have the Cambrian explosion happen till right at the end of the game, because we didn't empty out the first ocean zone. We were emptying out others and stuff like that, because you can do them in whatever order you want. But that's essentially the game. And
so it sounds, having played Evolution, it sounds like they have completely and utterly taken the basics of Evolution and just expanded on it incredibly. Like some of the stuff you were talking about, there are similarities to the original base game, but there's so much more depth now. You only had to... Hey, oh! We need a little buzzer for like puns of the day.
You can only really go, oh, and press the buzzer when you intended to do it.
No. We're calling it back now. So with the with Evolution, your options were you made herbivores or carnivores, and the food bank thing was like a kind of the watering hole. You drew a sort of card at the start, and you had a point number on there, and then you would place it down in secret, and then that would be how many you refilled the food bank. Now, the thing that was always interesting is the carnivores you would play minuses, because you would be basically the only one that could prey on herbivores. So you didn't need to take it from, say, the stash in the middle. You could attack other animals, which was always kind of a sneaky little thing. So you always found it really hard to start off a carnivore, and then to get it kind of up to the point where you need it to be like this apex predator, because if other people started doing carnivores as well, there was all this just infighting. So you really needed a huge population of like herbivores in order to try and feed off them. But it's interesting you say about the traits as well, because there was a couple of cards with where does it have anything in sort of terms of placement? So where you would put a species next to another species. Okay, so yeah, basically same sort of thing. You basically put this one in the middle, which then would left and right would buff, and then say something else with left and right and buff that. So you could have it
I actually had a lot of that in my setup. I had these
Very
whale
clever.
cleaners that were...
Right, okay, yeah.
Whenever someone would have the filter feeder or something like that, it would gain a load of food off of that. But it's all depending on where you're sitting and where you've actually placed your species. So there is
It's quite similar.
Very much the same, where I had loads of parasites. It was like you take, at the start of the turn, take 2 food from the fish to your right. So I had to position all mine in an order that left, right, so it all fed into the centre. So that the centre 2 ended up taking the most, really.
That's quite cool. They still added that then. That's nice.
I will say, like, to wrap this up a little bit, like, I think there is one fault that really is with this game, and it's a similar problem that Seven Wonders has, which is that not everyone around the table is going to have the same play experience, really, because a lot of how successful you're allowed to be almost depends on who you're sat next to around the table.
Right, okay.
Because if you're playing next to someone who's never played the game before and doesn't really know what they're doing, you can completely take advantage of that. And if you're sat away from one of those people that knows everything, you're not going to have the whole thing of them possibly preying on your mistakes and stuff like that. Because really, your interactions are only limited to the 2 people that are sat next to you, because your species almost work in a circle around the table. So your right and leftmost species will interact with the left and rightmost species of the person sitting to the right and left of you. So that's, admittedly, there is a little bit more interaction when it comes to having a creature that can attack another one. Because you can target anyone around the table with each of your attacking species, as long as people don't have defensive traits that would disallow it. It's something similar with Seven Wonders. You'll often find your play experience differs. Like, I won our game of Oceans, but I think it was largely due to the fact that I wasn't sat next to Ian. Because Ian's parasitic things were affecting Phil and were affecting Jay. It was doing nothing to me. So I had
I
a
didn't
number of
interact with
species
your
throughout
fish
the entire.
once.
Yeah. So
Didn't need to.
yeah. So really,
And it wouldn't have been effective for me to either.
yeah. So this is probably the one downside of the game. Some players around the table are probably going to feel like they've gotten the rough end of a deal or something like that, just by virtue of having sat next to someone. But I think
Make it sound like sitting next to me is a huge negative.
I mean, if you're
he says creating a parasite army.
Anyway.
I thought that was my starting hand.
So good, to be fair. What a clever play.
So this is the thing, right? So we had our starting hands, and Jay only really had quite passive things in his starting hand, and I had 3 cards that said Parasite, 2 that said Bottom Feeder, and 1 that said Translucent. And I was like, well, I'm definitely making an invisible Bottom Feeder Parasite because that's hilarious. And then once I played it, I realised just how much I'd wrecked Jay's chances of being able to do anything with his fish for the first couple of rounds, because basically my fish were just so at the end of your turn, you have Steve said you had your aging phase, which you take a fish off. If you can't take a fish off, that fish dies. So I was stripping everything from Jay, and then when it got to his turn, he had to use that fish, or that fish would die. So he couldn't play more than one fish for quite a while. What I think would have been even worse, if I'd played a left-hand Parasite and Parasite off Phil instead, I would have stripped everything from Phil, and then it would have been his turn. And it's sort of the fact that it was so soon afterwards, he would have really suffered. I think Jay was lucky no one picked on his fish whilst I was cleaning it out. But I feel like I could have done so much worse to Phil, because I could have parasited off him and then attacked him. I don't know. Jay's first few turns were ruined.
Yeah.
If I wanted to, I could have ruined Phil's as well. Phil didn't really get much steam going though, so it's an interesting one. I feel like the way I chose to play the game was quite anti other people's fun, which I didn't really realise until I'd already started going down that line, and the way my hand was, I didn't really have much of a choice.
I mean, it depends on the way you look at it, though. Like, it's up to that person that's playing. Do they establish a second species simply to feed off to your parasites whilst they build up defences on another species? Or do they immediately try and set up a defensive on one side of it, if you know what I mean? There is a certain amount of player choice, which I will admit, Jay did say he was aware of it. He just happened to not have the cards in his hand to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, at one point he had a fish that fed off his other fish and had a high enough defense that I couldn't kill it, because none of my fish could do a lot of damage. They just parasited food. They couldn't actually hurt anything, and that's literally all they did, was kept things alive, which is what parasites do, and ate their food. And my intention was not to kill Jay's fish. I don't want to kill his fish. I want his fish to flourish and me to feed off them.
Yeah.
Like,
you invested in his fish.
Yeah, there was a point where he just had a predator fish, which had so much defense I couldn't hurt it, so much attack that if I ever became visible, he could just kill all my fish. And so my entire game just became fill the reef, feed off Jay. Which I think I came second, didn't I?
You did, yeah.
I think I did quite well.
Yeah,
but
I think
I feel like that there's so many more mechanics of the gill feeders and feeding off them. There's so much more to the game But by the time I'd gotten to that stage, I had only had really parasite cards, and the game was set almost. I couldn't delve into. I could have. There was a point where I could have put like a gill feeder out, which fed all my parasites. But by that point, I'd positioned my fish in such a way that I was feeding off the two guys next to me, and there was no location I could put it that would benefit me more than it would benefit Jay. So at one point, I could have played a gill feeder and just filled it with fish, and just fed off of it, which would have been great. But I was already doing that to Jay's predator, so why would I do it? Why would I hinder? Why would I not hinder Jay in that regard?
Yeah.
There was a point at the end where I misunderstood. I thought we got points for every fish we had on the field. So I just played like 2 more parasites for no reason other than to have loads of parasites in the field.
Yeah.
Which I think, thinking back, I think I would have done it anyway just to have loads of parasites. I thought it was kind of funny. But
Yeah.
I think I could have played a fish that would have eaten. I think it would have been. It was like Phil's. I think I had enough there that I could have fed twice of it and eaten 10 fish, and I think I would have probably only been like 2 points short of Steve if I'd done that, because I guess I wouldn't have gotten I wouldn't have got my fish for attacking Jay. So I would have been a couple short, but it would have been a lot closer had I done that.
Yeah. Because I think because I was the person that had their fish left alone, I had a lot of species for a long time in that game, and it really boosted my score towards the end of it. I think we worked out, like, in the last round alone, I picked up a ridiculous amount of points, and ended up winning by a fair margin in the end. But
Jay did his best to try and cut you down. Phil was having a rubbish time. We didn't have like, any predators or anything.
yeah,
And I think Jay was trying his best to cut you down, but I was feeding off Jay and stopping him from really getting anything really big going.
yeah. Anyway, to be honest, Oceans comes with a big recommendation from me. I think Ian's already said his piece on it as well.
Yeah, I really liked it. I feel like there's a lot of things that I didn't do that could be played, which sounds like, oh, you didn't have the full experience, but to me feels like I could play this again and it'd be completely different, and I'd enjoy a completely different play style.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that deep deck is loads and loads of unique abilities, and it is a big old deck as well. So
There's a whole
there's
huge
a
part
lot
of the game we'd never even touched.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Daryl, you have a little bit to talk to us about Arkham Horror and Marvel Champions, I believe.
Which one do you want to start with?
You talk about them in whatever order you want.
Okay, I'm going to go with Marvel Champions first, because then I can compare it to Arkham Horror. So, I recently managed to get hold of the solo well, no, not the solo campaign. Sorry, the campaign mode for Marvel Champions, the Red Skull. And I've actually just recently got the Guardians of the Galaxy one as well, but I haven't actually played it yet. So I thought what I'd do is I'd start a campaign on Marvel Champions. Again, I wouldn't say I was getting fatigue on it. I was finding that after a while you could play as much as you want, but on your own there's no real sort of ongoing kind of effects, I guess, that Arkham Horror has. So I know the campaign has like a couple of things which you can add to your deck and sort of change the way it works and stuff like that. So that was quite good fun. So I started playing as Captain America, and it just felt right for him to fight the Red Skull eventually. It is really simple to play. It's not as grueling or as difficult as Arkham Horror is in terms of sort of narrative, I guess you could say. You get these nice little comic book kind of pictures that allow you to kind of sort of do the scenes, and then basically they just tell you what decks to build for the scenario decks, and then what kind of things to place in sort of the play, if you will. So it started off with you were fighting Crossbones. So he's basically sort of breaking into some area, and you had to sort of stop him. So where it kind of differs slightly in a way to Arkham Horror is it's only if you play it in expert mode that you have persistent damage or effects that kind of carry on. So if you were to lose health and items, for instance, it would carry on into your next play and so on and so forth. So with it playing just in standard mode, you're only realistically kind of, if you lose, you just start again. Whereas with Arkham Horror, if you lose, it's not necessarily you've lost, start again. It's something's happened, deal with it. It might come back later to haunt you, which, you know. So I think I was saying to Steve about this. There's definitely a kind of sort of entry level, I guess, campaign version as opposed to sort of Arkham Horror, which is a little bit higher. I would say kind of takes a lot more. Getting to know the rules is very much more of a kind of adult theme, I guess you could say. So it's almost perfect that Marvel Champions is quite. I would say it's something definitely you could teach like kids and they would get into it and they'd understand it because there's not a lot to it. You win, you beat the bad guys, you get given a reward. There are a few persistent things like the start of the first campaign is essentially you're trying to stop them from using experimental weapons. For everyone you draw out of the deck, they get destroyed. For everyone that doesn't, gets added into every like sort of deck after that, and it just means that the main enemy is going to have a really powerful kind of ability. So some of them are like weapons that ignore all things like they ignore tough cards, they ignore everything, so they just pierce straight through. They give them shields, hoverboards. It's crazy stuff, but yeah. So it's interesting kind of like level of style that adds to it. I think I've been given a card that allows me to heal up and do something, but it's a one-time use. Yeah. So side to that, I was playing Arkham Horror: The Forgotten Age. So I've been sort of playing both of them as sort of side by side. And in my opinion, I think Steve probably agree with this. The Arkham Horror stuff is just slightly a bit more in depth, and I'm sort of enjoying it a little bit more just because there's so much more levels to the complexities of it. So, for instance, I was playing Leo Sadler or I think it's Leo something, and basically he is just the rough and ready kind of adventuring type that kind of would go away and get it done. But I wasn't expecting the level of kind of resistance, I guess you could say, that you were gonna. The concept of this version is you essentially are exploring some ruins in kind of like an Aztec kind of theme in Mexico to kind of try and find a relic. You've been sent off to go and find it by this guy who I will say now is a piece of absolute shit. He basically will join you only if you agree with him. If you don't agree with him and choose the moral high ground, he just ditches you. And it's like, it's a genuine card that would help you. So it's like his abilities and stuff like that allow you to do things that would help you out. But because he goes, I didn't agree with you siding with the locals, off you jog, and it just gets taken out of the deck. And I was like, great, fantastic. That's absolutely brilliant. There's a really nice level of... So in Arkham Horror is a victory display, they call it. So basically every card that you fight, sometimes they have like a victory point on them, then they get added up and they give you experience at the end of the game, which allows you to kind of upgrade your decks, and you can pay to go on like side scenarios and stuff like that. Sorry, it's a fly. And they basically, this one added a different layer called Vengeance. So whilst exploring the ruins and trying to find your way through, you count quite a lot of vipers and like pit vipers and snakes and sort of snake men. Every single one of them you attack gives you a vengeance mark. The vengeance mark gets added to your victory display, potentially comes back later, maybe not. So you never know really what that's going to do until it absolutely destroys you. So I get through the first part, you know, pretty good. One thing that made this nice and different is you choose supplies before you go on your expedition. Those supplies help you in certain ways. So like medicine stops venom. Food obviously allows you to stay the night and not go mad, stuff like that. Water, ropes, compasses, stuff like that. All the things you would need to kind of navigate the wilds, if you will. I get to this point where it's like, okay, so this card's now in play. Add up all the vengeance. And then it is this times the vengeance. And I'm like, oh no, I've been killing snakes like there's no one's business. They're just in my way. Swoop, they're gone. Because they're like so easy to kill. annoy you because they venomize you, which then affects you later. But I'm just like, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. And then by one, I was like looking at it going, I've got like 5 vengeance points, that's fine. The big boss comes out. Every one of the little dudes you've killed, good bad boy. You're like, oh no. So I managed to get out in the end. I managed to escape because I found a way of escaping. And the bit that really I love, like now this in a normal game you'd be like, oh for God's sake, this is ridiculous. But my scenario ended essentially. I survived, perfectly fine, but because I had so much vengeance from the snake gods that I tripped, fell into a pit of snakes, and they ate me alive. So my character 100% got killed through only the fact that that happened. And then the thing that made me laugh the most was the guy that you were sort of like doing the expedition for, like Juan something. Because I chose to side with the natives, which also helped me from not getting attacked by the natives, he decides to ditch you. And then it's basically his like follow-on chapter is just him sneaking through, letting other people die because he's a chicken, and then finding the relic and taking it out whilst also letting everyone else die, and then flying back to merry old Massachusetts. You're like, Jesus Christ, man. But again, that's a great scenario. There was 5 different options at the end that could have happened. So it's so pot luck. You're never really gonna get the same outcome unless you try and do it exactly the same. But because everything's so varied and you adding different decks and stuff like that, it's just incredible. But yeah, like I was saying to Steve, I started briefly looking through the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion for Marvel Champions, and it seems like they're taking a few more levels out of the Arkham horror style thing. So now they have a victory display. So for certain cards, you earn victory points. Now, whereas you would use that to upgrade your deck in Arkham Horror, in this, because you're the Guardians of the Galaxy, it turns into money. And then the money allows you to then go to the market and buy cards. So they're adding another level of kind of, you can update and augment your decks to kind of include extra stuff. And there's some really interesting cards that you can buy for points sort of converted from the victory display. So they're starting to kind of add slightly more and more depth from the Arkham Horror side of things into Marvel Champions, but still make it accessible enough that younger people that aren't so rules savvy or don't want so much kind of in depth to play. You know, it's kind of, yeah. I would say the only thing I sort of slightly undisappointed with is the fact that if you fail a mission in Marvel Champions, you just fail and restart it. There's no consequence. Whereas with Arkham, if you fail, there's usually a consequence. You're probably going to get something that's going to happen later on because of it. And I like there's that level of like, you know, kind of 8 chapters down the line, something you did wrong in the first chapter really affects it. And I like that. But I don't know.
I've got to say, I definitely tend to find, having played both, Marvel Champions feels far more like let's set up a scenario and see how we do kind of game, whereas Arkham Horror is the storytelling, let's play
100%.
through a campaign, let's see what consequences we have to our actions and things like that, like you've been explaining, and you get your own unique narrative having played something like Arkham
100%.
Horror.
I think that's the only problem with the Marvel Champions thus far, is you kind of have to make it up for yourself, which is great. Like you could say Captain America fights the Rhino, and it's because of this, you know, or there's certainly another level of stuff added in certain scenario packs, like the Kang pack and the Green Goblin pack. They have like a set of stories in them, so they have got them. It's just obviously there's only say a 1-2 scenario, whereas Arkham Horror, like you say, it's like 8 packs, isn't it, or 6 or 8 packs, and that's a full-on story. However, I've never actually played Arkham Horror as a standalone scenario. Like it can tell, you know, like it says you can choose a scenario and play it. But I always feel like it's a weird thing to sort of pick a, say, number 4 out of 6 and just play that with no kind of pre-narrative or like sort of end part of it to just a fresh character. And it's kind of a bit of a weird, strange concept. I feel like it's definitely one of those things you would play, other than obviously the side scenarios which you buy separately. I don't see why you would want to play a random scenario out of like the Dream Eater cycle for, you know, even if it's I guess if it's the boss battle, if there's a boss battle type thing, maybe you just want to go at it with like a really powered character. But yeah, I think that's the only thing I would say. Marvel's more one and done, and Arkham's more 1 to 6 or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay. All right
enjoyed
then.
both.
So moving on.
Yes.
Again, me and Ian had a bit of a play around with A War of Whispers as well, also on Tabletopia. I've been wanting to play this one for a while, and I'll say right off the bat, it's another game I really really enjoyed. The idea is each of you are a member of a secret society that are almost like made up of. I suppose you think of yourself as a character like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones or something like that.
Oh my god.
So the idea is you have 5 warring armies on this map, and each army has 4 roles associated with it, which all do different things. And the idea is you're not controlling any of the armies. You're kind of getting in the ear of each of these 4 representatives of these armies, and you're telling them what to do and what move they should make. It can range from things such as bolstering the amount of troops that are on a certain area on the board. It could be telling them to attack another area, or you may do something like you may get them to plot by allowing you to take a card, which maybe gives you a couple of extra abilities and stuff like that. So the roles are really, really simple. The idea is that on every turn, you take off one of your representatives on the board that are currently in the ear of one of the representatives around the board, and then you place 2 down, taking in turns around the table. So it'll go in clockwise order. First of all, you'll take one of your representatives off the board, then starting in the circle again, you'll put one on, and then go around once more and put another one on. What it means is more of the roles are taken up over the course of the game, so more and more happens on the board. So at the start of the game, it feels like relatively little is happening on the board as you're watching these empires kind of expand outwards. And gradually more and more happens throughout the game. So the aim of the game isn't to be the person with... It's not to have the most troops of any of the armies on the board. It's not to have the most land. It's to have the control of most cities in each one. And the interesting thing is you have this display in front of you, which ranks every single one of the armies by putting tokens on each of your spaces. One of them, you'll get 4 points for every city that army controls. The next one, you'll get 2 points. The next one along, you'll get 1. Then you've got one that has 0. And then you have one that has a minus score on it. So the idea is that you want certain armies to succeed and you want certain armies to fail. And at the beginning of the game, they're all face down. So no one quite knows who wants to control what armies. This is important because just because someone takes control of a space on an army doesn't mean they necessarily want that army to succeed. You can throw them under the bus and deliberately make stupid decisions for that army. Send them into a battle they can't win just to thin their numbers on the board and stuff like that. Or perhaps leave a city and attack another region to leave a city open for another army to swoop in and take. Stuff like that. I found this really, really interesting because it's a game where you do not have total control over anything on the board, but at the same time you have a little bit of control of everything. And that's a really unique setup, which I found quite interesting. How did you find this one, Ian?
I really liked it. I'm quite the advocate for sort of tactical games where I can sort of make my mark and try and outplay people. I quite enjoy those. This was obviously slightly different in that you're kind of stuck with everybody trying to influence everything. You don't have direct control to influence your tactics on what you're doing. So there's obviously those different factions. The factions which I had like the most points from were, one was the horses, one was the bears, and then the next one was the ravens or something like that. So what I did is that the bears have loads of armies on the field but no cities at the beginning, and the horses have no armies on the field but loads of cities. So I thought, well, I'll use the bears to defend the cities that the horses have to get the points from that, and then probably take some cities with the bears as I go and get lots of points. I sort of had to talk Andy and Steve round as I was doing it, because obviously I would have got points from the Ravens, which Andy seemed to take control of.
I think it
I
was
was
the
gonna
Hawks, those ones, I think.
Hawks, sorry, yeah. I was going to get points from the horses, which Steve was dumping armies on, but I had to convince the pair of them that I was going south to destroy the lions,
Yeah.
to take all the cities off the lions. And obviously Steve's building armies next to my bear armies to try, thinking he's taking his armies into the undefended land. I had to sort of convince him that I wasn't going that way because I didn't want him destroying the bear armies, which I was going to use to defend the land that he was using his resources to defend for me, almost. It was weird. I wanted what Steve was doing to succeed, and I had taken control of an army I could use to defend what Steve was doing and Steve was building in. But I didn't want Steve to then destroy the stuff that I was doing, which wouldn't benefit him anyway, without giving away the whole grand plan.
Can I just say
interesting.
What is interesting about that as well, and plays into this a little bit here, is first of all, your obvious first thought when someone says to you across the table, "Trust me here, we want the same thing." First of all, your instinct is, well, do I trust that person? And if you come to the conclusion that, yeah, actually, I think I can trust this person, your thought process then goes to, but what if someone else takes control of the bear and pushes them into there? Ian has no control over that. Like, the idea of them being a lot of bear troops around the horse city is kind of a bit unnerving, because regardless of whether Ian is being truthful or not, someone else could easily come in and go, yep, bears attacking that city, and all of a sudden you're there going, oh, for God's sake. Like, it's...
You trust me, but you don't necessarily trust that I can keep 100% control over it. What I did do based on that is take 100% control of the Bears' armies and take every station on the Bears' side so that that didn't happen, because I didn't want that to happen either. I went south and took 3 cities with the Bears' armies as well. And then at the end, I was sort of, obviously, I had like armies controlled by the Bears. So I was getting points for the horses, getting points for the Bears. I was looking pretty good. And Steve attacked one of the Bears' armies with the horse armies. And initially I was like, no, why are you doing that? You could attack anywhere on the field. You could take any city. And then my brain went, you're going to get more points if he does that. And I was like, yeah, sure, you do you. That's fine.
So,
it was wait, I'm not in control. I'm not the Bears. I'm both the Bears and the horses, so it doesn't... If anything, I get more points. It's just weird. It's fun, though.
I mean, one of the really interesting aspects of this is once all of the armies have taken their turns, you get the opportunity to swap 2 of your roles that's on your board, so your influence, you're allowed to swap them round, but at the cost of flipping them over and revealing to everyone what those roles are that are in that position. And this happened very early on for me because the Hawks were doing quite well, I think, and the elephants were... Everyone was just trouncing the elephants, and the elephants were like my biggest scorer at the end of the game. So I, quite early into the game, swapped the 2 round and revealed them because it was just doing me no good at all. But it was also good because it was so obvious that everyone wanted to trash the elephants. The elephants suddenly became a real target over the course of the game for people just to swoop in and take their cities. Another thing that's really interesting about this game is it does not start balanced at all, which is quite cool. Because the horse army, for example, has tons of cities in their territory, but start with absolutely no troops at all on the board. The bear starts with tons of troops in its territory, but only 1 city. So the bears want to invade other countries very, very early. And the other 2 were somewhere in the middle of that. The other 3 armies were somewhere in the middle of that. So it means, depending on what armies you have, you also have different priorities for each of them, which is really, really cool. Again, it's got a real unique feel to it that I really, really appreciated. I feel like it's a game that it's not always obvious what everyone wants. For example, it looked super along the lines of, with Ian, that the bears were his army that he was backing, when in fact he was really backing the horse, but he managed to sway it that way. That was really interesting because I didn't even know that the horse was going to be your top scorer towards the end of the game. Like, when you revealed it, I was so convinced that the bear was your army, but hey, it worked out for the better. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I realised, I thought what I was going to do at one point is, if the horses collapse, I'd just make the bear my top scorer. Like, I just thought that I can swap that at one point. That's not a problem. Or even swap the horses out if they do really, really, really badly. Even to the point where at one point I took control of the hawk in order, because I had the elephant as the minus scorer. So there was a point where I was just like, I actually don't think I need any armies to defend the horses. I feel like I can just. It looks like Steve's doing that. I've got the bears, and I can defend them with the bears. If I take the hawks and put troops down south, Andy can't use them to attack the bears in the north. And also, he might use those armies to attack the elephants if I put them in the right place, which he did. He did exactly what I wanted him to do. And then we all just bullied the elephants.
yeah, pretty much. And then towards the end of the game, the lions, who I think the only person, I think like Phil and I think Andy might have had a low score for the lions or something like that. So they were.
He changed it. So
Yeah.
at the end of the game, me, you, and Andy all had the same top three, all in different order. So you had bears, horses, hawks.
Mine was hawks were my top scorers, then horse, then bear. I think.
Yeah. And then I had horse, bear, hawk, and Andy had hawk, horse, bear.
I think he might have had. I think he might have had hawk, bear, horse. I think.
Yeah.
Because me and you ended up with the same score, and Andy had a little bit less than us, if I remember.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. I mean, yeah, but yeah, really liked this game. It lived up to my expectation.
It's weird that we all ended up at a point where we all wanted the same teams to win, except Phil.
Yeah. I mean, there was actually a point in the game where I pretty much exclaimed, "I don't care about the lion. Let's just rinse them." Like,
yeah, I was like, super. Let's crack on, shall we?
I think that might have been the point where you were saying, "Trust me about the bear. The horse is fine." And at that point, I think that was when I said to you, as long as it's the lion that's going to be taking all the damage, because screw those guys.
I was like, brilliant. And then Andy cleared out an army for me so that I could move my bears into a lion city. And then Phil was just sat there. And you could tell his whole reaction was just, well, let's give up on the lion then, I guess. Let's find something else to do.
But
he
yeah,
moved all his armies south.
yeah. But anyway, this was another game that I've really, really enjoyed. So, but I think that's enough of that. Let's move on to some D&D, which I believe you've been playing in.
Yeah. So we took a huge hiatus because our DM got moved out of his house due to high levels of COVID infection at his workplace and his parents being high risk. He works in a care home and kids just don't care. It's a at-risk kids care home and it was just rampant. It was just going around in circles throughout all the people there. So he moved in with his sister, who's an air hostess. So she wasn't around as much, I guess, and he can just sort of isolate away from people who might be at risk. Either way, we're back at it. We're picking up where we left off in Avernus. I can't remember really super what happened before that. But basically, last session was spent abusing the joys of the knockback on Eldritch Blast on a city that's hovering several miles in the air. Anytime someone walked near the edge of a cliff, I just blew them off the side. I've probably got about 8 kills from creatures that just happened to stray slightly too close to the edge of like a cliff face. I just knocked them into the abyss. And then we realized the joys of this. We have one of our characters is a sorcerer that has the spell banish or something like that. Like you can banish someone back to their realm, which is great in Avernus because when you banish someone, they're already in their realm, which is a bit of a concern. What we didn't realise is just how effective it is at saving innocence, because we just banish people back to the mortal realm, and they appear back in their realm completely fine. So he was going around saving people, which is sort of against his standard procedure, but like a woman and her 2 children, we just sent them back to the mortal realm. And at one point we found a bridge which had like a giant on it, which is being possessed. And we were like, giants come from the mortal realms, right? And Sean was like, yeah. So it's like, okay, I'm going to cast Banish on the giant. This giant just back into the mortal realm. And we're like, cool, now we don't have to fight anything. So we're just launching people off cliffs and through realms in order to get to places. We got to a big fortress and there were loads of crabs. No idea why. Just cut through a bunch of crabs. And like we're at like this, we're about to head into the big part of this big fortress. But yeah, so far Avernus is filled with knocking things off cliffs, banishing people back to the mortal realms, and stomping on crabs.
Lovely.
Wow.
Oh man.
Our ranger has got a new pet as well, which is an infernal goose, which is a flaming goose which honks and attacks everything. Brilliant. It's just the most aggressive Canadian goose, but on fire. It was initially named the Horriblest Goose, but has since been renamed Geese with a... We gave it a spoon.
Oh, brilliant.
Oh my god, that's such a bad but great pun.
Perfect. Geese with a spoon.
It's very good.
Yeah.
I was happy with that one personally.
No,
Yeah.
that's very good.
That-
I think Daryl, you might have gone
Just
to
so
the
it adds
moon.
up.
Just give it the spoon. Give it the
Hello.
spoon.
Yep, can hear you now. Did he cut out for you as well, Ian?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Yeah. I was just saying I'm glad he gave it a spoon so it like has its namesake.
Okay.
Yeah, it was great. It was perfect. It's a little session to get back into things, but we're doing that. But I've started Pathfinder with Jay recently as well.
Oh, okay.
Where he's DMing Pathfinder, which to be honest I've completely forgotten about. But that's gonna be next Wednesday as well. But I'm playing a Sky Pirate.
Oh, nice.
Pathfinder has all of these cool new like roles. So I'm a gunslinger buccaneer, which means I get like buffed when I get drunk. Yeah, I can't wait to fully Sky Pirate. We did like session 0 where we got to know each other's characters and stuff, and I dumped gunpowder on the ground in a tug of war contest and set fire to it to cheat. And the neutral good and lawful good characters in the party are all like, we don't trust this pirate, and I'm like, no, we win. It's as simple as that. There were no rules. I'm not bad because there were no rules and I took advantage of that. So immediately there's conflict, but that'd be fun.
Yeah. Okay. Just to let you guys know, I'm going to cut this bit out of the podcast, but I'm going to scrap crew because we've overrun by quite a bit here. So we'll go straight onto the X-Men Insurrection thing for you, Daryl. So I'll bring that up.
X-Men Big Erection.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so next up, Daryl is going to talk a little bit about X-Men Mutant Insurrection.
Okay, so I won't go too much into detail of this. I only bought this game purely based on the fact that I like the original X-Men, Uncanny X-Men. And it looked very similar to it. And obviously, yeah, so you basically... It's a story-driven game where essentially you use dice in order to kind of work your way through scenarios and missions. And then with those missions, they then flip over a card, which will tell you a bit of story fluff, and then it will tell you to go to card 25B or A even, flip that over, and then eventually it sort of ends with a showdown. So there's a few things that I really enjoy about this game. The first part is you have these little kind of, it's all cardboard, so it's quite similar to Out of Rim. So they've used a little bit more cardboard related stuff, so that I think you get quite a lot more for what you would pay normally if you're buying a miniatures game. So you get a cardboard version of the X-Jet, which is really, really cool. Yeah. And the way it works is when you start off, all of your characters go onto the X-Jet. Is it called X-Jet? Has it got some other name?
I
thought it was the
can't
X-Jet.
remember. Yeah, I thought
No,
I
I
thought
can't.
it was, but
I keep trying to stop myself from saying Quinjet, but yeah, so you put the characters on there and then you decide where you want to go. So you split up the team if you want to.
Yeah, it's called the X-Jet.
It's just the X-Jet.
Based off a Blackbird, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can choose if you want to go as a team and do stuff as a team, or you can split off and tackle different scenarios as you will. There's a threat tracker on there, green, yellow, and red. When you start getting into sort of the yellows and reds, you start getting a lot more kind of issues. There's some relationships you can kind of form with each other, which is quite cool. So certain missions will give you rewards like bonds. So, for instance, say I was playing Cyclops and Ian was playing Jean Grey. We could try and find the bond that's love, for instance. And then because of that, we get buffs for doing things.
Are you saying we could bang?
Wait, we could. However, when you draw certain threat cards, and also fight certain characters, there are negative sides of that. So it could turn the bond upside down, which then becomes a negative trait. So we've fallen out of love. And then that means we can't use certain abilities and stuff like that. So there's some really interesting concepts with that, where the game I was playing, I played as Cyclops and Wolverine, and I was sort of testing around with it. There's a deck of mutant cards which you can they're sort of lesser known ones, side mutants if you will, that you can kind of bring and save, and then with them they give you abilities, and again you can kind of use them how you will. So there's some nice little kind of aspects to it. Like I say, there's dice rather than cards, which is quite cool. So you're rolling your dice and you get you get two options to kind of like change your dice. Now, certain dice have symbols on them that will give triggers to like enemy stuff. So enemies don't really ever attack unless you trigger. Basically, you get a little Magneto symbol. Once you get a Magneto symbol, then you get screwed over, basically. All in all, it's a really easy game. Like I wasn't expecting to learn it so quickly and genuinely have that much fun with it. I only played the introduction scenario. There's a really nice part where the plot card, the back of it starts like between sort of 1 and 3 kind of pictures. So the plot card always stays, and then as you go through the scenarios, more get added to it, and in the very end, you flip them all over and build this lovely like kind of picture display of the end fight. So they call it the showdown. So for my one, I was fighting the Brotherhood of Mutants. So I had 2 cards, I placed them together, and then it gave me a selection of different missions I had to do with that and kind of tackle it as I will. It's a really cool mechanics in it. Like you don't, until you get to the showdown, if you die, you just choose another mutant. So no one's ever out of the game until the very end. So it's nice that you don't have to kind of put a lot of effort into sort of like playing as one character and immediately dying kind of thing. So you've got that. Each character comes with like a little assist card. So you can choose to use your own assist card, which gives you 2 extra dice, depending on the colours, or you can give it to someone. So again, I could give it to Jean, or Cyclops could give it to me, or whatever like that. So it means I can kind of... Wolverine's very much an aggression sort of kind of guy, so it's all red dice more or less, whereas certain ones you need other symbols. There's a bit more options to get them on, say, blue or yellow dice. So if I had a blue or yellow dice, I'd sort of give that assist card to, say, Wolverine, and then Wolverine has a better selection of trying to complete some of the missions that aren't all necessarily just rage based. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would like to play it at some point with you guys. I think you can play up to like 6 people. It's got the same kind of mechanics as like normal card games, where it's like 1 plus your player count, add this kind of thing. But yeah, I'll bring it round at some point. We'll have a go on it. It's, like I say, super easy to pick up, really fun, quite all story driven. So yeah,
good stuff. And
very.
that is all that we have this week on what we've been playing. So I guess we should move on to some news.
Bring us that news, Daddy.
Okay, so only a couple of news stories this week, and we're going to start things off with a bit of news on a classic game. Carcassonne is getting a 20th anniversary edition. We talked the other day about the Ticket to Ride one. It looks like Carcassonne is moving in the same vein. First of all, the packaging for this, like the image that I've got on screen right now, doesn't really do it justice. It's kind of like this real regal blue with almost like a gold kind of like lining to it.
Looks really
Which-
nice.
Yeah, it looks super, super nice, the packaging for this. And really, if you've been looking to buy Carcassonne and haven't bought it yet, but are still thinking about it, this might be a really nice addition to buy. Essentially, what they've got is they've got completely reworked artwork for all of the different tiles that are on it, and you actually have meeples with pictures on them now. So they've actually like put artwork onto the meeples and stuff like that. I believe this one comes with the River expansion, which I know the regular version of Carcassonne does come with. And it does come at a bit of a steep price point, though. It's around $50, this is going to be. Considering that Carcassonne is one of those games you can buy for about half of that price tag, I think, if you just want to get the bog standard version. I mean, this looks really nice, but at the moment I'm looking at it and thinking I'm not sure whether that $50 price tag is justified.
Like, I don't know, maybe it's a collector's thing.
I think so.
That's largely what they're going with there. They're pushing this as a collector's thing, and I think they're really trying to make it that fans to get something for fans of the game to invest a little bit of extra money into to get. It's a difficult one because, like, for example, I love Carcassonne, but I don't feel any need to upgrade my edition of it. It's perfectly fine as it is. I don't think there's anything on here that suggests that perhaps they've boosted the size of the pieces or anything like that. From what I can tell and from what I'm reading in this article, it just looks like they've just redone the artwork and stuff for it. So
It says there's a couple of new gameplay options, but not. It doesn't really go into them what they are. It just says fresh and exciting, whatever that is.
yeah, it will be interesting to see because it does quite obviously come with both the Priest and the River expansion in it already.
Yeah.
But like I said, they're both already available as the starter box anyway. So I don't know whether that is the extra expansions or whether there's going to be something else on top of it. I'm really not sure. Like, one of the tiles does interestingly seem to have a picture of a crowd holding a sign that has like the number 20 on. That's something that's, I don't know whether that's just an aesthetic thing.
Yeah, I was wondering that as well. Like it's quite a prominent part of that tile.
I mean, it's not a feature that I recognise from the base Carcassonne set. I will say that.
What is price point of Carcassonne at the moment is pretty low, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like even on the more expensive end, I think it's like £30, something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, £20 for a special edition that looks pretty for your collector's shelf.
Yeah.
If you already own the game, it feels a bit.
Yeah, I can't see myself upgrading my current set to this one. But it doesn't take away from the fact that I really enjoy Carcassonne. I think it's a great game. And congratulations on 20 years, I suppose. Well deserved. Okay, so now moving on, we have one more story. Really, it's just a Kickstarter. It's an interesting one because it's a 3-part Kickstarter. So this one is a collection of 3 different games that can be bought separately or in one package as 3 complete games. Interestingly, 2 of them are actually reissues. One is Factory Funner is a complete re-release of a game that's quite difficult to get now, and Ghosts of Christmas, that one is what is it? It's a reissue of another game of a different name. I've forgotten what it was now, but yeah, it's not an original game. Palatrix is the game that is very difficult to get hold of at this point, and they've just kind of like attached a new theme to it, and redesigned it. All three of these games look really, really nice. If you haven't, for our podcast listeners as well, the third game that's in the pack, the original one, is called Bear Raid. So, just to give a brief overview of these three games, Ghosts of Christmas is a trick-taking game. A kind of a take on things like hearts and stuff like that. So you'll be playing tricks. You'll be putting bets on how many tricks you're actually going to win, and then revealing at the end to reveal the various points you've gotten. Every single turn is made up of 3 different tricks, which represent Christmas past, present, and future. So again, you'll be placing your bets on those, and I think it's just one where you play out the rounds, and whoever's got the biggest score at the end of it wins. It's a very simple kind of trick-taking game, but one that looks really, really nice. The artwork on it is like really cool. I really, really
Yeah, it does
do
look
like
really
it.
good.
And yeah, it actually is a very useful Kickstarter. I'll put it Kickstarter page. I'll put the links in the comments down below, because they actually do give a step-by-step guide on how every single one of these games work. So yeah, Ghost of Christmas Past is a very simple trick-taking game. Okay, so the second game in this list is Factory Funner, which really gives me Galaxy Trucker vibes. The idea is you have a bunch of tiles that are in the center of the board, and you're all grabbing them and trying to connect your factory up via a number of like conduits and stuff like that as well. So you're kind of building a machine on the board and trying to make it run as efficiently as possible, with the aim being to score as many points as possible, I believe. Again, this one has had a really nice redesign for it. The pieces all look very colourful and generally look very, very cool. It's worth noting as well that these aren't massively expensive games either. So Ghost of Christmas Ghost of Christmas was $15. Factory Funner was $34. But the new game that's on the list, Bear Raid, is also $34. You're essentially, if you're buying them as a pack together, I think it works out that Ghost of Christmas works out being free, I believe.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like that.
Yeah, but Bear Raid looks as if it's the one that's going to be the most gamey kind of game. It's kind of like a stocks and shares style game, where everyone's both trying to buy stock but also short it at the same time. It looks like it is also a dice manipulation game, so you're very much re-rolling dice, possibly ruining other people's plans as well whilst you're at it. Sort of another one of these things where you don't have, a bit like War of Whispers that we were talking about earlier, where it looks like you don't have complete control over anything, but you have some control over everything. So, yeah, this one, it looks cutesy with the art style. Apparently Bear Raid as well is a real term that they use in stocks and shares as well, and they've just gone whole hog with it and put actual bears into it. So let me find this here. Bear Raid is a real phrase used to describe when a stock price is intentionally lowered through short selling and rumours.
Oh, so like every day.
Pretty much.
Less when the public do it to GameStop, in which case it's not okay.
Funny
because
enough,
they're not running off big companies.
But anyway, I wanted to bring up this because it's kind of interesting the way they've put this across. Now, I don't know a lot about Kickstarter, but I don't know whether this is a cost-cutting measure, because I don't really see this happening very often, where you have 3 new products and you decide to bundle them all together in the same Kickstarter with the option of buying them separately or all together.
Yes, it's the opportunity to provide value, which I guess currently people might be looking at new games because they're going to be able to meet friends soon. And no, if you're looking for a quick financial in, if you've been struggling for a while because no one's been buying your stuff, I guess it's a way of getting people back into it.
I mean, as well, if you're really just getting into board gaming, like, or maybe perhaps you've played a lot of the kind of gateway games and stuff like that, and you're looking to expand your collection or something like that, you're getting three vastly different games here as well. You're getting a trick-taking game, you're getting kind of like a tile-laying game kind of thing, and you're getting a very maths-driven stocks and shares game as well. So you're certainly, for a discount price, getting a good selection of games.
Yeah,
here.
you're getting a good sort of fundamental kind
Definitely.
Mm.
But yeah, this is one that I'm thinking of keeping my eye on. It looks quite interesting.
Yeah.
But that also makes up all our news for the
I
day.
have a small thing to add that I've just
have?
noticed from that website. You've seen the Z-Man Games one.
Okay, sure.
It's just really quick.
Sure.
So apparently, Mondo Games and Restoration Games, they held a competition to design new characters for Unmatched.
Oh, okay.
So 4 new characters that are coming to sets, which sound quite interesting. It's Harry Houdini versus the Genie of the Lamp, right? And then William Shakespeare, I assume, versus Rosie the Riveter. I didn't know who that was until I saw it, but it's the lady on the poster, you know, with the arm like this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So apparently they're meant to be coming out. The other thing which I laughed about was they are bringing out 4 Marvel sets, and the Jurassic Park 2 player set is coming out with the first large-scale character, T-Rex. I have
surprising.
no idea. So you know, like how we were talking about a second ago about how they're going to see nothing's going to be too OP or whatever. I don't see how the T-Rex is not going to be, but yeah, we'll see.
It's got to have like a downside to it or something that like.
Yeah, tiny arms, can't see people when they're not moving.
It's
But
other
it's
than that,
based
like,
on movement. It
be.
can't attack things if they haven't moved the previous round, or
Yeah, maybe.
like something like it's weak to pack tactics, like the Anvil or the Raptors jump on it or something.
it'll be.
I'm just curious. 'Cause it's huge.
It's going to be interesting to see how they actually handle that. Simply because the T-Rex is going to be taking up multiple spaces on the board. How are they going to handle it being... Because a large part of Unmatched is the way that zones work and stuff like that.
Exactly.
How is it going to work with the T-Rex, like, transferring itself and landing between 2 zones and stuff like that?
Yeah,
I know
because
there
it'll
are...
always probably be on them.
Yeah, I know there are multi-zone spaces on the board, but this... it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this, I suppose.
Yeah. But yeah. It's interesting to see they are actually going ahead with that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right, let's move on to our big topic. Okay, so as always, our big topic is chosen by our patrons, who you can find over at patreon.com/everybodydice, where for as little as $1 a month, you can help shape our content. You get the choice of which game we'll review each month, as well as what topics we cover on this podcast. Every single time we run this podcast, they get the choice between 3 different subjects, and their choices this month were... What's the first board game you want to play post-lockdown? Would you like to see any board games translated into films? And what's the most impressive game expansion, which is the one that won this time around? So, our big topic. What is the most impressive game expansion that you guys have seen? So I'm going to throw it out here right now. I kind of want to do 2 of these, because I think if you're talking in terms of visual spectacle and stuff like that, most people's minds will immediately go to figures, like miniatures and stuff like that. I really feel like most people will. And so I wanted to give one answer for that, and then one answer where it's more to do with mechanics on a board game that look interesting or something like that.
See, I wanted to get a bunch of them out of the way.
Sure.
And say stuff like there's some D&D expansion books that are really cool. So I can't remember. You know when it was like deep in your head, and then the moment you start talking about it, it's gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
Sure.
Hang on. D&D expansion bag. I can't remember what it's called. It's a woman's something of something. I'll get back to it in a minute. But obviously, you could go so far as to say all of the Legion sets are different expansions. All of the X-Wing figures are different expansions.
Mhm.
The one I was going to bring to bear, which I think is the most fun out of the miniatures expansion, are all the Necromunda extended stuff. I thought were actually brought stuff to the game, adds different balances to how a lot of the armies play when we were playing Necromunda for that short period. And I would say that's probably the one I would go for when it comes to like miniatures and stuff.
So I think if I was going to talk about miniatures in board games and things like that, the one that immediately jumps out to mind, that may be a game that not so many people really rate or anything like that, but I know Z Garcia goes on about it a lot on the Dice Tower, but the others, it's like, yeah, most of the figures in there are like these small kind of almost like zombie. It's made by Come On Games, so they're kind of like your zombie side style miniatures and things like that. They did one expansion though called Apocalypse, where they did the Four Horsemen, and they made them these massive oversized figures, and then had one like central Apocalypse figure as well. And man, they are really, really impressive in terms of what you were expecting from what you had from the other previous expansions. Then all of a sudden you get 5 oversized figures in this expansion set.
That's pretty cool.
It was a real surprise when that happened, and it's probably one of the most interesting looking expansions that I've seen, I think, for a board game specifically. How about you, Daryl, in terms of miniatures and stuff like that?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because, like Ian said, there's a lot of stuff that is an expansion to every miniature game. I mean, yeah, I would say, yeah, the Star Wars Legion stuff. Again, having the different factions, that was quite cool with the way they changed it up with the newer stuff. Yeah, I mean, the problem is that there's so many expansions for things that I've been playing lately that I don't know if I could draw them as like being the best. Does that make sense? So, like, especially a lot of the living card games, which essentially every single thing they bring out is an expansion in some way or another. It's funny because I'm curious. There's a Legend of the Five Rings, like kind of campaign play coming out as well. So I imagine that's going to be quite good to sort of kind of get people playing that rather than sort of playing 1 versus 2, but playing like a kind of campaign style thing. But yeah, what about you?
If I'm talking along the lines of like expandable card games and stuff like that, I think that Path to Carcosa set from Arkham Horror is exceptional. I think from what you were saying, you'd go with the Forgotten Age one as well.
Yeah, I would. It's weird because you know, like they do the Return twos.
Yes.
There's one now that I've got my eye set on is the Circle Undone.
Okay.
And the reason why is in the Return to set, they come with actual kind of full-size tarot cards, which seems like it's part of the kind of the gameplay of that is drawing tarot cards. So like I like the fact that they've added like extra things to it. Like I haven't yet played your one. You were talking about the Path of I can't say the word. You know the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the fact that it's coming from the base game, which is sort of just a, you know, find these people, kill these things, do this, to having like a kind of extra level of stuff, like for the one from one I'm playing, The Forgotten Age, where you have to kind of get supplies before you go out, which I like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? 'Cause there are so many expansions for these kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, if I want to go into more board gamey kind of stuff,
Before we head to board gaming stuff, I remember what I'd forgotten, which was
yes, please.
Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Oh,
Okay.
Which adds loads of really wacky, cool stuff in like D&D. So it's got like 26 new subclasses, and it's something we've added to our campaign. It's just added so much new content that we'd otherwise not really touched. Like there's a multi-class thing that I've done for my character, which is it's added a rogue archetype, which like is all about soul stealing and stuff, which really suits my character, which is really nice to add to it as we head into Avernus. So that's what I would go for if we're getting away from board gaming stuff and stuff that's a little bit aside. Is that or House of Chains for Necromunda? But I think Tasha's Cauldron and everything is such a breath of fresh air into standard D&D stuff that's what I'd probably go for.
Okay. Talking about board games and stuff like that, the thing that my mind immediately goes to is Pitch Car. I think I sent you a couple of videos and stuff of it. A game that I got a little while back. It's another kind of like dexterity flicking game kind of thing where you you set up your own racetrack and you flick your cars around the track in a basic 2-lap race and stuff like that. It's lots of tiles and barriers and stuff that you put up to help your piece, which is just like a little round puck, actually slide round corners and stuff like that. They started releasing a lot of expansions for it, which had some really nice little things in, like chicanes. Some of them would have jumps and stuff like that. But then they released the loop, and all of a sudden, like, these sets are quite big anyway, and then all of a sudden having this massive loop-the-loop on there that people do flick their pieces and you see it actually like spin around it and things like that. That really blew my mind when I saw that and thought, man, that is really frigging cool. I think in terms of board gamey stuff, that's probably the most impressive thing I've seen in a game expansion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when you showed me that looked incredible. It's difficult, isn't it? Because, like you say, some add sort of like new aspects to it. So the Clockwork expansion, for instance, that you did the review on, where it kind of adds a sort of solo play with adding these extra characters, doesn't it? Like an AI-driven kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it adds like quite a huge part to a game where you normally need like 4 people. So I mean, board game wise for me, probably anything that kind of enhances the overall experience to a level that kind of either you need less people or more people, or just adds another element to it. So like you were saying, like the loop adds an extra level to it that makes it kind of more interesting. For me, probably Chronicles of Crime, I would say.
Okay, yeah.
Not necessarily. I haven't tried the newer stuff that you've been doing, but definitely each one after that adds to kind of slightly different level of texture to it, I guess.
I will agree there. Like the Noir expansion is
100%.
very, very cool.
You flat out beaten me to that.
Oh,
that is probably what I was going to say as well. Chronicles of Crime is there's just added nuance to playing. It was the Noir one we played, wasn't it? Where there's like the gangsters and stuff.
Yeah. That was
you start having things like you can all of a sudden stake out places. And you can bribe people and you can rough people up and stuff like that. And that was a really neat little jump from what you'd gotten used to with like the Scotland Yard kind of stuff. Yeah, that was really cool.
That's what I was going to go for, to be honest. The only other ones, like, because there's a lot of expansions in my head that feel like what I'd describe as Kickstarter style. You should get this stuff. So Dwarven Beer Fest had one where it was you get extra characters, but they're meaningless in terms of their addition to the game. As much as I like Dwarven Beer Fest, I don't think the additional characters add much, other than a couple of other beverages and a couple of other favourite beverages, and it wasn't a huge addition to the game. There's a few board games that sort of followed a similar path where their add-ons are just sort of, here's a couple of extra cards so a couple more players can play, but it doesn't really add any new mechanics and stuff to the game, which I feel like we should be taking advantage of if we're going to be talking about the best additions to games. I liked this a cheeky edition because it's sort of miniatures based, but looking at some of the cool stuff they added to Blackstone Fortress,
Yeah, that was quite
something
cool.
else I was going to mention is
In
that
fairness, that's a board game.
yeah, obviously I'm immediately attracted by the miniatures. The cool Ogren was a really nice addition, and the commissar as well. But the actual some of the content they've added to Blackstone Fortress looked like it could have been fun. I think the only reason we haven't gone through it is sort of a mixture of time and COVID. We haven't really gotten to the crux of Blackstone Fortress yet, but I think that's one I wanted to bring attention to. But Chronicles of Crime would have been my go-to. The noir one was very cool.
Yeah, I mean, without talking about spectacle and things like that, if I wanted to talk about an expansion where I feel like I wouldn't be able to go back since playing this expansion, if we're talking about it from a mechanical sense and stuff like that, I actually probably would go with Elder Sign, and we got really, really good at Elder Sign eventually after a while, between the play group that we had. And we had to pop in this, which is the Unseen Forces expansion. If you don't know Elder Sign, it's a dice rolling game, a bit similar to Age of War, except you're playing through a storyline and you're trying to solve events on cards and stuff like that. It's a neat little game. But like I said, we really got to a point as a group where we were able to go through the motions with it, and just we would breeze through stuff a lot of the time, pending incredible bad luck. This one, however, now is something where I wouldn't want to play the game without it. It adds these curse and blessing dice to it. Blessing dice Blessing dice make things a whole lot easier for one player, but are lost when they fail at a task using this blessing dice. But the curse dice absolutely cripple players, and really to get rid of them, you kind of have to start working together as a group to unburden this player. Because the only way to get rid of them is either by making them succeed whilst using a curse dice, which is unbelievably hard to do, or someone has to bless them whilst they're cursed, which is incredibly expensive. So you at some point have to decide whether you want the extra player in the game helping with all the tasks, which is usually the better option, or just trying to muscle through it without them, and not heal them at all by giving them a blessing and doing it that way. It added an extra element to the game that I really, really appreciated. It's not so much an impressive expansion as it is something that I wouldn't like to play without anymore if I was to play that game. But yeah. Anything else? No?
No, I can't think of anything.
Yeah, I think the problem is like when you do think of like impressive expansions in terms of look, it's hard to look past miniatures really. Like the aesthetic stuff, but like if you were to break it down into like mechanical things and things like that, there are a few out there. I think Lords of Waterdeep is another one with the expansions on it. I wouldn't like to play that without the I think it's Skullport, Scoundrels of Skullport. For that one, that really enhances the game a lot, should you have played that one to death. The other one is Champions of Midgard. I see loads of people online saying that the Valhalla expansion that they added to that makes the game. Can't play it without it anymore, and I see that's quite a common one that comes up. But yeah, that's really all I've got, I think.
On that bombshell.
So on that bombshell indeed, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the podcast. If you would like to follow us on the social medias, you can at Everybody Dice on Twitter and at Everybody Dice Show on Instagram. Didn't really cover it in the episode, but if you would like to send us a question to answer on the podcast, we didn't have one this week, but you can send those to everybodydiceshow@gmail.com. And hey, we've got a Facebook page at facebook.com/everybodydice. That seems to get updated more in terms of what's going on and stuff like that. So by all means, sign up there and keep an eye on that. And our Patreon, of course, at patreon.com/everybodydice, where you can get a couple of neat little extras for just as little as $1 a month. Apart from that, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Goodbye.
Wave Daryl through your frozen screen. Bye.
Bye. We're at it in post.